I was never the kind of person who needed recognition to feel useful. I wasn't the star of the meetings, never the one sending company-wide memos or getting bouquets after every project. But I showed up. For 26 years I showed up, early, prepared, quietly reliable. I managed deadlines, soothed egos, filled in when someone quit mid-quarter. I didn't climb any glamorous ladder. I just held the structure together. And I was proud of that. Before we start, please take a moment to subscribe to this channel for more true stories like that. My name is Eleanor, and for most of my adult life, I worked as a senior project manager at the same company. Same desk. Same parking spot. Same birthday potlucks in the break room. That job wasn't just a job to me, it was my rhythm, my routine, my anchor. I had built a life around it. Mortgage, insurance, dental appointments. The reliable tick of ordinary stability. So when they called me into that conference room, sterile white walls, a folder already waiting for me, I knew before they even spoke. I watched their mouths move, felt my heartbeat slow, heard words like restructure and realignment of priorities, but it didn't matter. The decision had been made before I even walked in. I left the room with a paper box full of memories and a thank you card signed with generic signatures. I sat in my car for a long time. I didn't cry. I just stared at the steering wheel, my knuckles white against the leather. 26 years reduced to a single meeting and an escort to the door. I wasn't angry, not yet. Mostly I was disoriented. Like someone had rearranged all the furniture in my life and I was tripping over things I used to know by heart. When I got home I called my daughter Clarissa. She's 33, sharp, stylish, always busy. Works in digital marketing, whatever that means. We talk but not deeply. She's always said I'm too sentimental, too soft. So I thought she'd understand. I expected a sigh, maybe a little outrage on my behalf. Something like, "They'll regret it, Mom," or "You gave them your life." Dad, she laughed. Actually laughed. I remember holding the phone a little away from my ear, thinking I must have misheard her. But no. She laughed and said, "It's about time, Mom. You were just a cog in their machine anyway. You should be glad they finally let you go." Just a cog. She said it so casually, like she was offering me a reality check, like I should thank her for the brutal honesty. But it didn't feel honest. It felt cruel. Dismissive. Like everything I had poured into that job, the extra hours, the projects I salvaged, the people I mentored, was invisible to her. Like I was invisible. That sentence, "just a cog," stung in a way the layoff never could. Because it didn't come from a faceless executive or a corporate policy. It came from my own daughter. The person I had stayed up nights for when she had croup. The person I helped with college applications, covered rent for during her first unpaid internship. The person I made pancakes for every Sunday morning just because. That night, I sat at the kitchen table long after the sun went down. The silence in the house felt heavier than usual. I didn't have the heart to turn on the TV. I kept hearing her words over and over again. Just a cog. Like I had wasted my life doing something small and meaningless. I stared at the calendar. All the things I thought I had, security, purpose, value, suddenly felt paper thin. The house I'd paid off, the pension I'd built, even the shelf of framed certificates on the wall. None of it seemed to matter in that moment. Because my own daughter saw me as disposable. And maybe the worst part? A small part of me wondered if she was right. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay awake thinking about all the invisible things people do. The mothers who make lunches at 6 a.m., the managers who absorb the chaos so their teams don't feel it, the employees who don't shine but hold everything together. The quiet pillars. I'd always thought that mattered. But apparently not to her. And yet, even as the hurt settled deep, something else stirred beneath it. A kind of quiet defiance. Not anger, at least not yet, but something sharper than pain. Something that whispered, maybe you weren't just a cog. Maybe they were too small to see your worth. I didn't know it then, but that sentence, intended to diminish me, would become the seed of everything I built next. And this time I wasn't going to explain myself to anyone. If losing my job was the spark, then the silence that followed was the slow burn. Clarissa didn't call to check on me after that day. Not even a text. I told myself she was busy, she always was. But it was hard not to notice how easily she had moved on from something that had shaken the very ground beneath me. For the first time in decades, I had no job, no desk, no deadlines. My calendar was blank, and so was the phone. She'd post stories online, little snapshots of her world. Team outings, matcha lattes, some kind of neon-lit co-working lounge with bean bags and exposed brick. She wore sharp blazers and captioned things like, "Another pitch won," or "This team is fire." I didn't know what half of it meant, but I scrolled through all of it anyway, wondering when I'd see her face in person again. When she finally came by, 2 weeks after the layoff, it wasn't to check on me. She had left something at my house, an old charger maybe. She swept in, high heels clicking across my hardwood floor, talking a mile a minute about her manager's new girlfriend and some ridiculous team-building retreat to Iceland. I just stood there, nodding like a background prop in her monologue. Then she said something that stuck with me. She said, "It's wild how your generation stayed in one job forever." I'd lose my mind. "You all were so domesticated." Domesticated. I smiled politely. She laughed playfully. But inside something shifted. I remembered the nights I stayed up with her during finals, bringing tea and flashcards. I remembered when she moved back home after college and I edited every version of her resume, 6 versions to be exact. I remembered quietly covering her rent when she called me crying, whispering, "I don't want to tell Dad I can't afford it." And I didn't. I just paid it. Because that's what we did. We made sure they didn't fall. I had done those things while holding down full-time jobs, balancing budgets, managing office crises, and coming home to cook dinner. And yet now, to her, I was someone to be gently patronized, like a relic from a simpler time. A museum piece. She talked about her office yoga classes and how her company had a nap pod and free espresso machines on every floor. "You'd love it," she said. "It's not all spreadsheets and beige cubicles like your era." I didn't correct her. I could have told her about the teams I'd led, the fires I'd put out, the million-dollar deadlines I had quietly delivered on time, under budget. I could have mentioned how I once saved a client relationship that was hanging by a thread, how I trained interns who went on to become VPs. But I didn't. Because in her world I was the woman who packed sandwiches, not strategies. Who stayed too long at one place not because I was stuck, but because I believed in earning trust over time. Instead I listened. Really listened. And in that space something changed. I began to pay attention, not just to what she said but how she said it. The way she dropped buzzwords like pivot and scalable without ever explaining what they meant. The way she spoke about her company's founder like he was some sort of messiah. The worship in her voice when she said, "He's a genius. He built everything from scratch." I noticed how she rolled her eyes when I talked about paper planners or phone calls instead of Slack. How she acted like I was interrupting something sacred if I asked her to repeat a tech acronym I didn't understand. I began to see that her confidence wasn't rooted in clarity, but in camouflage. She repeated jargon like prayers, but underneath I started to suspect. She didn't always know what she was talking about. It wasn't bitterness. It was observation. Quiet, patient observation. After all, I'd spent my career reading people, clients, coworkers, vendors, learning when to speak and when to listen. That skill hadn't left me. It had just been buried under years of motherhood and modesty. So I watched. And waited. And as I watched, I realized something even more painful than her dismissal. She didn't just see me as outdated, she didn't see me at all. I had become background noise in the life of a woman I helped raise. Someone who could recite PowerPoint slides but couldn't remember the sound of my voice when I used to sing her lullabies. Someone who wore girl boss t-shirts but forgot who paid for her first car when she couldn't get a loan. And still I said nothing. But I wrote it all down. In a plain notebook. The dates. The comments. The company name. The founder she admired. I didn't know what I was planning yet. Only that I was done being invisible in my own story. I didn't want revenge. I wanted clarity. And slowly, without her knowing, I began collecting the kind of information that no algorithm or espresso machine could ever offer. It started with one of Clarissa's rants. She had dropped by on a Wednesday evening, distracted, half scrolling through her phone as she slumped into the armchair across from me. No greeting, no small talk, just immediate unloading. I swear if I hear the word restructure one more time I'm going to lose it, she said, not looking up. No one knows what's going on. The leadership team is falling apart, everyone's whispering about layoffs, and now there's some hush-hush talk about a merger. It's chaos. She rolled her eyes, laughing nervously. But whatever. I'm safe. I'm too visible to cut. I didn't respond right away. I just nodded, handed her a glass of water and tucked that word, merger, into the folds of my mind like a puzzle piece I hadn't realized I was missing. That night after she left I stayed up. Long after the news had ended, after the kettle cooled on the stove, after the house went silent, I opened my laptop and started searching. Not blindly. Carefully. I'd spent decades navigating contracts, supply chains, and quarterly forecasts. I knew how to look between the lines. Clarissa had never told me the exact name of the company, just shorthand. But I'd heard enough over the months. A mention of a client account, a few brand names, a poorly redacted document once left open on her screen. With some effort I found it. A mid-tier SaaS firm focused on team collaboration tools, streamlined dashboards, cloud integrations, and digital workspace optimization. In other words, software that businesses use to manage chaos disguised as productivity. I dug deeper. Their funding rounds were public, as most are. Their last injection had been 18 months ago and they'd burned through a shocking amount of it. Theo, young, ambitious, overextended. Several executives had left in the past quarter, and a recent interview had hinted at streamlining redundancies, which in corporate language meant cutting people. The more I read, the more familiar it all felt. The carefully worded press releases. The shrinking margins behind glossy branding. They were dancing on the edge of something, and it wasn't innovation. It was desperation. And then I saw it. A line in an obscure investor newsletter, barely a paragraph long. Rumors suggest, company name, may be seeking acquisition or partial buyout. Quiet talks reportedly underway. It wasn't public knowledge. Not yet. But it was real. I leaned back, my fingers resting on the keyboard, and closed my eyes. The same stillness I used to practice before a big meeting settled in. Not fear. Not excitement. Just readiness. There are moments in life when the fog lifts and you realize you've been preparing for something all along without knowing it. All those years managing teams, navigating crises, solving problems no one else could handle, they hadn't made me obsolete. They had made me fluent in something Clarissa didn't even know existed. How to survive when the oxygen in the room starts thinning. I didn't tell anyone what I'd found. Not a soul. I printed documents, made phone calls to old colleagues, even reached out to an old mentor who now worked in private equity. My severance was modest, but my savings weren't. And I knew where to look for leverage, for patterns others missed. Most people thought age dulled your edge. They forgot it also gave you reach. It was like piecing together a quilt in reverse. Each corner led to another. I requested records. I found loopholes. I mapped out their ownership structure and realized something even more striking. The founder still held a majority, but he was hemorrhaging confidence. His public statements had become vague, bordering on frantic. I kept thinking about Clarissa, her voice echoing from that day. I'm safe. I'm too visible to cut. He didn't know. Not really. She had grown up in a world where visibility meant invincibility. Where showing up, talking fast, and using big words bought you security. But I had lived long enough to know that when a company starts shaking at the core, visibility often becomes the easiest target. She thought she stood on a pedestal. She didn't realize it was a diving board. I found myself rereading some of her past messages to me. Old, sharp-edged ones. You're too old to start over. You wouldn't last a day in my industry. Everything's changed, Mom. You wouldn't get it. I used to shrink when I read those. Now they just confirmed what I already knew. She had underestimated me. They all had. But I was done narrating my worth to people who didn't want to hear it. I didn't need Clarissa to respect me. I needed to remember who I had always been. Every step I took from that point was deliberate. I didn't fantasize about revenge. I wasn't interested in gloating. I had no desire to punish anyone. But I was absolutely going to buy that company. Not to prove her wrong. To prove I hadn't been wrong about myself. It's funny what people assume about you once you're no longer seated at the head of a table. They assume you've given up the right to occupy one. But I wasn't interested in controlling the room anymore. I just wanted to be in it, with enough leverage to change the air without needing to speak. The connection came through a former colleague from years ago. Ethan, now a partner at a quiet but influential private equity firm. I hadn't talked to him in over a decade, but he picked up on the first ring. I explained the situation in measured tones, avoiding any mention of Clarissa. This wasn't personal. It was an opportunity. We're already circling that company, he said. They're bleeding from the top. It's ripe for restructuring, but we don't want to parachute in a stranger. We're looking for a quiet operator. Someone who understands systems, not just spreadsheets. I listened. Then I told him I wasn't looking for control. I didn't need a title, a corner office, or credit. I just wanted a seat, just enough to influence, just enough to matter. He didn't even hesitate. You're exactly who we need, he said. The deal took 3 weeks to finalize. It was mostly behind closed doors, stitched together by NDAs and quiet conversations with people who didn't want their names on anything yet. I used part of my severance, some dormant investments, and a portion of the emergency savings I once imagined would carry me through retirement. The papers were signed on a rainy Tuesday morning. I remember because I sat in the back corner of the notary's office while the windows streaked with soft, gray light. The rain felt fitting, not gloomy but cleansing. Clarissa had no idea. To her, life was unchanged. She still forwarded me memes about boomers who don't get it, and texted out of obligation, not interest. She hadn't asked about my job in weeks. Maybe she assumed I was taking pottery classes. Or joining a bridge club. Something age-appropriate. Meanwhile, I was onboarding as a consultant. Anonymous, internal-facing, and specifically assigned to workflow optimization. I was never on video. My identity was shielded. The team knew me only as E. Rhodes, which the firm had given me as a code name to preserve discretion during the transition. Most of them assumed I was some faceless analyst, dropped in to make everyone's life harder. Clarissa certainly did. It started with a snide comment one weekend over lunch. She was scrolling again, talking fast, not really expecting me to listen. God, this new consultant is butchering our systems, she said, rolling her eyes. Everything's being documented. There are flowcharts. Actual flowcharts. Can you imagine? Like it's 1999. She laughed, expecting me to join her. I just took a sip of my tea. It's slowing us down. Micromanaging every process. We used to be fluid. Agile. Sounds like they're trying to make things more efficient, I offered. She scoffed. Efficient? Well, just rigid. It's someone who doesn't understand how real-time teams work. I smiled. Not because I was smug, but because she was half right. I didn't understand how her version of real-time teams worked. I understood how they failed. From inside the system I could see all the cracks. Departments working in silos. Budgets ballooning on duplicated software tools. Customer complaints buried under performative Slack emojis. The entire company ran on energy drinks and delusion. But it wasn't beyond saving. It just needed order. Focus. Leadership that didn't care about optics. So I started with the foundations. Communication pipelines. Approval systems. Role clarity. None of it was flashy. But it worked. Clarissa didn't like it. Change felt like control to her. Boundaries felt like betrayal. Every time she vented about another update from E. Rhodes, I knew we were making progress. What she didn't know was that I wasn't alone. The equity group brought in a new CEO, young, sharp, and capable, but even he took my notes without question. We had meetings weekly. My reports were clean, actionable. I didn't need to prove my value. It was evident in the way confusion started disappearing from their weekly metrics. And still Clarissa talked. Whoever this E. Rhodes is, they're totally out of touch. Out of touch. I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. There was a strange power in staying invisible. In watching from the sidelines, not to punish or humiliate, but to witness what happens when you quietly take your seat again, not to announce yourself, but to do the work no one else was willing to do. The work I'd done for decades. It wasn't revenge. It was restoration. Not of the company. Of myself. I hadn't set foot in a corporate boardroom in nearly 5 months. Not since the day I was let go with a folder and a pitying smile. I told myself I didn't miss it. That the long, sleek tables, the whiteboards no one really used, the dry coffee and tighter smiles. None of it mattered to me anymore. But the truth is, walking into that quarterly meeting, I felt something settle in my chest that hadn't been there in a long time. Not nerves. Recognition. The request had come casually. We'd like you present for the final restructuring presentation. We need sign-off on a few allocations. It wasn't mandatory, but it was expected. And truthfully, I wanted to be there. Not out of ego. I just wanted to look them in the eye. All of them. Including her. I wore a muted navy blazer, comfortable flats, no jewelry. No fanfare. I carried only a clipboard, the papers neatly tabbed and highlighted. The meeting was already underway when I arrived. I slipped in quietly and took a seat near the end of the table. No one stood up. No one announced me. Except the COO, who nodded briefly in my direction and said, "We can begin." That was it. But it was enough. I noticed Clarissa before she noticed me. She was seated 3 chairs down, looking polished, bored, her fingers tapping her notepad while someone discussed quarterly burn rates. She didn't glance my way. Why would she? In her mind, I existed in an entirely different orbit. A safe, irrelevant one. But then I spoke. Only a few words. A clarification about the resource allocation chart and the impact of workflow redundancies. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't gesture wildly. I just offered the correction and moved on. It was mid-sentence when Clarissa turned. If you're feeling this story so far, go ahead and tap the like button. It really helps more people find these stories and join our little community here. She looked past the speaker, then directly at me. For a moment, she blinked like she'd seen a ghost. Her mouth parted slightly. No sound. Just recognition dawning like slow sunlight. She didn't say anything. Neither did I. The meeting continued. But Clarissa didn't take another note. Her pen remained poised in the air, forgotten. I didn't linger when it ended. I stood, nodded politely, and left with the same quiet dignity I had walked in with. No goodbyes. No dramatics. I had done what I came to do. Later that night, as I rinsed a teacup in the sink, my phone buzzed. A single message. "How long have you been involved?" I didn't respond immediately. I looked at the screen, felt the words sit there like a weight she didn't know how to carry, and then I opened my files. I took a screenshot of the official ownership breakdown. There it was. My name listed clearly under stakeholder contributions and voting rights. Not at the bottom. Not buried in legalese. Prominent. Permanent. I hit send. No text. No explanation. Just the image. A few seconds later, the message was marked seen. But no reply came. And that was fine. She didn't need a speech from me. No justification. No motherly unpacking of events. The facts were enough. The moment was whole without embellishment. She had laughed when I lost my job. She had reduced me to just a cog. She had written me off. My skills, my experience, my years of quiet, consistent contribution. But what she didn't understand, what so many don't, is that real power doesn't demand to be seen. It doesn't wear a crown. It waits. It listens. It moves when the time is right. For years I had fed her, protected her, built a life where she could flourish. And when the roles reversed, when she was the one climbing, I had stepped back with grace, hoping she'd remember the ladder she used. But she didn't. Now she saw it. Not with anger. Not with shame. But with the clarity that only comes when illusion shatters. There was no need for revenge. This wasn't a movie. This was real life. And in real life, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply let them see you as you are. Finally. Fully. Quietly undeniable. Clarissa didn't come around for a while. No family dinners. No weekend visits. No casual just in the neighborhood pop-ins. It was quiet. And not the peaceful kind. The kind that settles over a relationship when too much truth has been exposed. When someone realizes the story they've been telling themselves doesn't quite hold up anymore. At first I wondered if I should reach out. Break the silence. Offer her a chance to talk through it or at least level set. But the truth is, I didn't want to fix it for her. Not this time. There's something hollow about always being the one to smooth the edges after someone else throws the sharp words. This silence, uncomfortable as it was, felt earned. So I let it be. When she finally did show up again, it was for my birthday. She brought a lemon tart from that French place we both like and hugged me tightly at the door, maybe too tightly, like she wasn't sure where we stood. I made tea. We sat on the patio where the jasmine was just starting to bloom. She talked about yoga, a new book club, something her friend's dog had done that was hilarious. Not a word about work. I didn't ask. We pretended, in that strange, practiced way families sometimes do, that everything was normal. But the air had shifted. There was a respect in her silence. Maybe even fear. Not of me exactly, but of what I had shown her, about myself and maybe about herself too. I think part of her believed I would stay small forever. That I had quietly retired from ambition the moment she stepped into it. But what she didn't understand is that I never stopped being who I was. I had just directed it elsewhere. For her, for our family, for the rhythm of a life built to support more than just my own name. Now I was back at the table. Not just at her company, but others too. After the acquisition settled, I began reinvesting. Fully. Intentionally. I sat in on pitches, met with founders, reviewed projections like I'd never left. One company caught my attention. Run by a single mom in her early 30s, bootstrapping a sustainable fashion platform out of her garage. She reminded me of someone. Not because of what she had, but because of what she was willing to become. I wrote the first check. It wasn't massive, but it was enough to give her room to breathe. To stop running in survival mode and start building with clarity. Watching her grow, watching her stumble and stand and stretch toward a future with no guarantee, it reminded me why I ever entered this world in the first place. Clarissa doesn't know about that investment. Or the two others I've made since. She doesn't ask and I don't volunteer. We talk about gardening now. Books. What show we're watching. Sometimes old family memories that make us both laugh in a way that feels real, not rehearsed. We don't talk about work. And oddly, that's where the deepest shift has happened. There's no fight, no revenge, no icy tension. Just distance. A space that didn't used to be there. She walks a little more carefully now. Not out of guilt, but awareness. The way you move when you realize the floor you thought was yours isn't quite as stable as you believed. I'm not angry anymore. But I do wonder what it must feel like, to be intimidated by your own mother. Not because of what she might do, but because of who she's always quietly been. That's the irony, isn't it? For years I was just mom. The ride giver, rent helper, errand runner, background fixture. Then one day I showed her the whole picture. And the silence that followed was its own kind of applause. No loud confrontations. No told you so speeches. Just this soft, reverent hush between us. She still hasn't asked about the ownership. Maybe she never will. But if she does, I'll tell her the truth. I didn't buy the company to prove anything. I just bought back a part of myself. It was a Tuesday afternoon when I wandered into that little bookstore near the harbor. The one with the creaky wooden floors and the smell of old paper and new coffee. I wasn't looking for anything in particular. I just finished a meeting with one of the startup founders I was mentoring, and I had time to kill before heading home. Something about bookstores always steadies me. Maybe it's the quiet. Or maybe it's the promise of so many beginnings stacked side by side. I drifted past the new releases, the memoirs, the business bestsellers. Titles lined up like trophies, each author proclaiming their hard-won wisdom. I ran my fingers along a shelf of journals, most of them covered in florals or embossed affirmations. Then one caught my eye. Simple black. No frills. Just 5 words etched in gold. Don't wait to be chosen. I stood there for a moment just looking at it. Not flipping through. Not checking the price. Just absorbing. It hit me in a way I didn't expect. That I'd spent so much of my life waiting. For promotions. For recognition. For invitations to tables I was already qualified to sit at. Even as a mother, waiting to be appreciated, understood, maybe even admired. And maybe that's what made Clarissa's laugh sting the most. Not just the words, but the assumption behind them, that my value had been decided by someone else and dismissed. That I was just another cog that could be tossed aside without consequence. But what she didn't see, what no one saw, was that the years I spent supporting didn't erase the builder in me. They just rerouted her. I hadn't forgotten how to lead. I'd just been leading from behind for a while. I picked up the journal, held it for a second, and then I bought it, not for Clarissa but for myself. At home I cleared space on my desk, pushed aside a few receipts, a half-written thank you card, and set the journal down. Right next to my favorite coffee mug, the one with the chipped rim and the words "Stay Sharp" printed on the side in faded blue. I opened my laptop, scanned through a few updates from the startups I'd backed, responded to one, forwarded another. Then I paused, looked at the screen, took a breath, and kept going. Not because I had something to prove, not because there was still a score to settle, but because it felt good to move forward on my own terms. Quietly, intentionally, without asking permission or needing applause. That's what people don't always understand about success, especially the kind that comes later in life. It isn't about revenge or visibility. It's about remembering that the best parts of you never expired. They just waited for a time when you were finally ready to choose yourself. I didn't buy the company to teach her a lesson. I bought it to remind myself that I could still build something better. That I didn't need a title or a job description or someone else's belief in me to make a move. Clarissa still doesn't know the full story. I think part of her suspects. But we haven't talked about it. And maybe we never will. Because some victories don't need to be explained. Some moments are just for you, the quiet reclaiming of a voice you almost forgot you had. The decision to act not out of spite but out of memory. The memory of the woman you were before the world told you to shrink, to wait, to soften your edges in service of someone else's comfort. That woman. She's wide awake now. And she's not waiting anymore. Now it's your turn. Share your thoughts in the comments below. What's one lesson from this story you'll carry with you? I read every single one and your stories matter here.